If you've ever been to San Francisco in the last 10 years, there's no doubt you probably saw a lot of homeless people. But unless you actually go into certain parts of town, you won't actually see how bad the homeless problem is in one of the richest cities in the nation. And what's terrible about it is that these cities' efforts aren't even addressing the core root of the problem, and it's getting worse here too. Now, I drove all around San Francisco on an early morning in late October in 2021. I had just left Oakland, where the homeless problem is also out of control. There's 5,000 homeless people in Oakland, and that number's growing too. But over here across the bridge, that number's triple. Unlike Oakland, here in San Francisco, there's a lot of homeless people in the downtown area, but it might not be as widespread as you think. In the nice areas on the north end of town, there's some homeless stragglers in pockets and tents on some sidewalks, and if you walk around enough, you'll see a few people sleeping on benches and in doorways. Almost 100% of the homeless issue in San Francisco is due to two main problems: drug addiction and mental illness, and the cost of living. And to really understand the homeless problem in San Francisco, we can look at two examples of this. One is in the Tenderloin, in the heart of the city, where addiction and mental illness is rampant. And another area is a 15-minute drive outside of town in an area called Bayview, where the cost of living problem has reared its head. We're going to begin in the Tenderloin, a 50 square block area where things are really out of control and getting worse all the time. There's no accurate estimate to the number of homeless people here in the Tenderloin, but every day you see hundreds of people lining the sidewalks here, many of them living in tents or laying on the ground. And this is in the morning. At night, it's way worse than this. And while the Tenderloin's the worst part of San Francisco for homelessness, in the surrounding neighborhoods of Haight, Mission, Union Square, the Castro, Golden Gate Park, Buena Vista Park, and the Embarcadero, they're also really bad for homelessness. This whole area here is the worst of it, but it's in the Tenderloin where things are the worst. There's nothing like it in this country. By last count, there were more than 1,000 tents on San Francisco sidewalks, and you'll find a lot of them in this part of town. Most of the homeless people in this part of San Francisco are here because of mental health and addiction problems. And a lot of the drug use here is fentanyl, or a new form of meth that's far more damaging to the brain than before. Now, a lot of people feel like the city of San Francisco is not doing enough to solve the addiction and mental health problems. San Francisco likes to use the term body autonomy, or put in your body what you want. It's almost like they're enabling people to commit a slow suicide based on their relaxed policies. There's a bunch of people in San Francisco who are frustrated by the city's response to the homeless problem here. The city likes to put the blame on affordable housing or job loss, and they even back that claim up because a lot of the homeless people they surveyed say they're homeless because of job loss, but they don't ask them why they lost their job. For many, it was booze and drugs. Last year, they put 2,000 people up in hotels to house them, and less than 10 of them actually checked into rehab. Some say 7 out of 8 homeless people in San Francisco are addicts. This is why property crimes here are so high. They shoplift at Walgreens without getting in trouble so often that Walgreens is shutting down in many parts of the city. Target also closes early now too. Mom and pops are closing their doors because of all the addicts who steal to support their habits. And they'll take anything here, and their favorite target's parked cars. This might be the car windshield smashed capital of the world. While violent crime's not that bad in San Francisco, robberies and vandalism and thefts are out of control. And organized gangs seem to be free to roam the Tenderloin, which has become an open-air market for selling drugs. Last year, San Francisco police arrested about 800 drug dealers, but they just let them right back out again so they can peddle drugs to the homeless, which makes them remain homeless. Police say their hands are tied because of city policy. They just aren't arresting the drug dealers, and they're letting people do drugs right out in plain sight. The worst part is the city's drug rehab system's really ineffective and unorganized. A lot of people out here don't even know where to turn to get clean, and the process takes so long. It can take from a week to 2 months to get into an available bed or even begin the drug treatment process for these people. The nonprofits here are supposed to be helping, but a lot of them are just filled with overhead, and a lot of people say they're not really doing much to help. Many say the nonprofits here are dismissive of the addiction aspect of the homeless problem, again blaming the problem on a high cost of living. Now, there's about 50 nonprofits in San Francisco created to help the homeless problem, but they aren't really solving anything. One agency I looked at has 40 people on staff. That's probably more than $6 million in staff alone. How much of that trickles down to actually make a difference on the street? There's no oversight on the spending here either. I tried to get 5 nonprofits in San Francisco to talk to me about what they're doing to help solve the problem here, and all 5 refused. Why is that? It's estimated San Francisco spent $1 billion on its homeless problem, and 75% of it's allocated to housing. Only 25% is allocated to address mental health and addiction and recovery. A lot of sensible people say those numbers should be reversed. Spend the money on treating these people and getting them transitioned back to a regular life. Then you wouldn't need so many affordable homes, right? I mean, how many homes can they build? It'll take decades to build affordable little apartments for all the homeless here, and then more and more will keep coming. Right now, it's estimated there's about 1,500 affordable housing units here, and they take forever to build. And when they go up, it raises the number by hundreds, not thousands. There's currently 20,000 people on the wait list for affordable housing in this city. And don't forget they passed Prop A back in 2015, which was going to set aside $310 million to build 30,000 affordable houses here. Well, that didn't even come close to happening, and it probably never will. You could drive around San Francisco and find homeless camps all over the place, but the real story is when you drive past the homeless encampments, where you have hundreds of people in one place. In total, there's about 100 camps with at least 6 tents or more in San Francisco, at last count. These encampments move around a lot, and they set up in new locations all the time. But when I was there, I was able to find one way down here in the Bayview, Hunters Point neighborhoods along the bay. Here, there's hundreds of people camped or parked along an isolated road on the edge of town. And it's this part of town that symbolizes the cost of living problem in San Francisco. In this encampment in Bayview, it's not so much a drug and mental illness problem. Here, camped out in the elements, are a ton of people who just can't afford a San Francisco home. Rent here has doubled since 2010. It was about $1,000 for rent 10 years ago. Today, the average rent's more than $2,000 a month, but good luck finding that easily. You got to spend about $3,000 to actually have a decent place here. And San Francisco is by far the most expensive place to live in the country, where the average home price is $1.5 million. You can ask people living like this why they don't move somewhere more affordable, and a lot of them will tell you that this is their home, or they have friends and family in the area, or they just can't afford to leave. But it's also true that cities like San Francisco cater to their homeless population by providing free benefits. Plus, each homeless person here gets more than $500 a month in cash. Wouldn't that be nice? Nearly half of San Francisco's population is white, but only 30% of the homeless here are white. It's the black population that's homeless at a high rate. The black population here is 6%, but 37% of the homeless here are black. People are also aging into homeless here. In San Francisco, a third of homeless people are over the age of 50. It's very sad visiting grandma or grandpa in their RV in a place like this. A lot of the stuff I saw downtown San Francisco was very much just people that were just struggling to just day to day with drug use. But I did see an encampment that was down the Bayview area. Have you seen that? All the RVs and cars lined up on the south side of town over by the bay.
Yes.
That to me felt like a lot more of a cost of living problem. Those people are living in their cars and in RVs. They just probably just can't afford to live in an apartment or in a house in San Francisco. How does that even begin? Is there like one person that just decides I'm going to pull over right here, and then somebody else like pulls their car up, and then pretty soon you have hundreds of people that line an area like that? Because I've seen stuff like that before.
I think that they target an area where they feel that is safe. And one thing from what I've learned in working with this population is that when you lose, first let me say homelessness comes in many shades, many faces with different stories attached to it. So you got a lot of people that have gone through, excuse my language, but they've gone through some shit. And, unfortunately, some of them, they don't have support. Some of them will lose all their family members, or some of them will just, get hurt, lose their job. And they just can't afford to just make it. So you do have specific individuals that do have like RVs and like trailers, and they just find us. I want to say I don't want to just say that they just pick a spot and then they all just migrate. because I see it as they're picking a safe spot where they're not going to get harassed, they're not going to be shunned by society. And just like anyone else that has, four walls to live under, they're trying to make it too. And a lot of them, they are working class citizens. They just don't make enough to make it because the Bay Area is unfortunately so expensive. It's unrealistic.
So you think that, okay, so I saw hundreds of people parked out on Bayview, Hunters Point. What percentage of those people that I saw out there that are living in cars and RVs like that, not in tents on the sidewalk, that's a different type of homeless situation. What percentage of the people that I saw that were down on Hunters Point do you think have regular jobs that commute to work regularly?
I have to say that it's probably about 25 to 30%, just because a lot of this population, they are disabled. They receive, disability benefits. And to be honest, disability benefits is just not enough for this vulnerable population to live in the Bay Area. That's a fact. Disability runs from about $600 or less. Sorry, my phone's ringing. From $600 or less to, up to $1,200, depending on, if you had enough retirement built up or whatsoever. But for the most part, it's not enough. And then, it's the system, I think, that's been put in place to where it, unfortunately, this population can't progress in a way because there's so many barriers. You can't afford to live in San Francisco and even afford a bunk bed living off disability. It's insane.
Mm-hmm. So do you think a lot of the people that are lined up on the streets like this are going to be out there just indefinitely? I mean, is there a plan? Do they have a plan? I didn't stop to talk to any of them. Most of them were still inside. I didn't see too many people out. Are they trying to wait until they can save up money to move? Are they trying to wait for affordable housing? Are they just like day to day? I guess there's probably all three, or it's
I would say
that
it is all three. Of course, they're waiting for a solution to their problem because things are limited, and here in the Bay Area, and especially in San Francisco, and there's just until, I always say, everyone is completely in survival mode, and it's different when you're living on the street. When you're within your four walls, you have more of a safety net. And when you're not, then you just trying to survive. I don't know how much more in detail I can explain it, but just working with this population, they're more afraid of somebody coming to steal their stuff, or someone, a lot of women, single women, they're more afraid. And let me say this too real quick. In regards to the drugs and the mental health, first, from my experience, there are addicts out there, but it's also connected to survival mode, as crazy as it sounds. I've ran into a lot of people who specified that they, choose, to have a substance to treat their mental health, or they choose to have a substance, to be in survival mode, which is to stay up at night because they're worried about someone coming in their tent to beat them up, take their stuff, and do something, just horrible to them that they didn't even deserve. I think that with the mental health as well, too, there needs to be more supportive systems in place to help treat mental health. And I'm going to also say to treat addiction, too. Because when you have, and this is not just about the homeless population, this is people in general. A lot of stuff that's out there on the streets is eating people alive, and they end up using it to self-medicate themselves as opposed to get high. So there needs to be a program that's in place that's going to help treat that disease to the addiction. I hope I said this
Mm-hmm.
correctly, but
No, yeah,
yeah,
no, I agree with you. A lot of them are taking fentanyl just to not be dope sick instead of getting high anymore. They need it just to
right.
survive. I agree. And, from what I hear, the city of San Francisco spends like 3/4 of their money trying to find an affordable housing solution and only 25% on treating drug addiction and mental illness. And there's an argument that's like, well, they should put a lot more resources into trying to get these people right mentally. And then, number one, that would solve a huge problem. And then you wouldn't have to have so many houses to build. I mean, these people could get back on their feet. The number of houses that they say they're going to try to build, like 30,000 affordable houses, is like an unrealistic number. I mean, they've built like 1,000 of them in like 5 or 6 years. I think a lot of people would then say, okay, they're clearly not going to be able to build enough affordable housing for you. Why don't a lot of these people just go to a cheap state, go to like, the Midwest or the South or somewhere where it's like $600 a month for rent? Why sit there and stall for so long when it's clear that you're just not going to be able to get a house or a bed?
I think a lot of it has to do with, just like the gentleman said in your first video, it is their home. And a lot of the population are in kind of like an older generation. I don't want to even say older. I want to say like from like mid 50s to like mid 60s. So that generation was here, let's say in the Bay Area, at a time where, yes, they were born and raised, and just to be kicked out, just because of rent control, it's kind of like, a lot of them are like, well, I feel like I shouldn't have to go anywhere. And I totally respect that, because you have a generation like my generation where we may have been born and raised in the Bay Area, but then when the rent had spiked up, we're all migrating to, an hour, 2 hour away, and now deal with, the change of commuting. So I think a lot of it has to do with, that. And yeah, they feel like it's their home. It's their home. They don't want to go
Yeah,
anywhere.
no,
I mean, I strongly
I can.
suggest, it makes sense, and it sounds more better to like move to a cheaper state, but there's still, an adjustment to the change. And then on top of that, if you're in the position to be in survival mode, you're not worried about going to another state. You're worrying about getting by every day.
Yeah, I can understand. I can relate to that. And some of the people that are older probably don't feel like they have it in them to pack up and take off and head across country. I mean, it's getting worse. It's not going to get any cheaper to live in the Bay Area. It's just going to get
Right.
worse and worse. Yeah, it's a shame. Is the word on the street that it's a cost of living thing, or an addiction thing, or a politics thing, or all three? Or, I mean, how do Bay Area people feel about why this problem is so bad? I know there's no one really easy answer.
It really depends on the source that they're getting their information from. But in reality, and I can speak on this too, from having a friend who currently has an adult son who is right now dealing with addiction and living on the streets in San Francisco. We believe he's probably in one of the encampments down near City Hall. By and large, 70 to 80% of the homeless population in San Francisco is either dealing with an addiction issue or a mental health issue. And unfortunately, the powers that be that are giving all this money to these nonprofits to try to fix the housing problem, they're only focused on housing as the issue, but they're not addressing the deeper issues of addiction and of mental health. And those, because a lot of these people, and even here in the East Bay, when I'm talking to like the county sheriff and how when they're interacting with people that are homeless, in many cases, when they're trying to offer services to people to help homeless people, many of them, that's the lifestyle they've chosen for themselves. Now, I'm not saying that for everybody. I mean, certainly there are people who need help with housing and they have found themselves in an unfortunate situation. But by and large, just using my friend's son as an example, He doesn't want help. She's tried to set him up and get him help. For right now, in his condition, living on the streets of San Francisco is the cycle he's caught in. I don't want to necessarily say that's what he wants, but it gives him, I guess, a sense of autonomy. He's kind of out doing what he wants to do, and unfortunately, he's dealing with an illicit drug addiction that has him caught in a cycle. And so even though family does try to help him, he's resistant to the help at this point.
And, you brought up the agencies. I mean, I reached out to probably half a dozen agencies that deal with the homeless in one way or another, with all the fancy names of, shelter this and forward this. And none of them got back. A couple got back to me and were like, oh, we're not going to talk to you. But I researched one of them. They had 40 people on staff. Mm-hmm. And I know that so that means they have to have $5 or $6 million in salary, just overhead, just for the salary, plus however much it costs for whatever their lease in the office building. I don't know how much of the money that's donated to these nonprofits try to make the difference to get some of these people off the streets is actually making it to the people that are supposed to be off the streets. Because it seems like the nonprofit agencies that are supposed to be helping the homeless are eating up most of the money just with the overhead.
Yeah, well, the interview I sent you that kind of delves into a bit more, that I was telling you, the gentleman who actually lived on the street, and now that he has gotten off of the streets and he's actually working with people, he gave a really interesting statistic. So what he said this is for San Francisco, so not for California, but just for the city of San Francisco. He said they spend $260 million a year on contracts to nonprofits for homeless. So these are for the nonprofits that are providing services for homeless. And I guess, so there are some areas where they have tents that are maintained by these nonprofits to help. They say it on average costs $60,000 a year to manage one tent. And so that includes a variety of services. But then there's soft costs, which go to the costs that you're talking about in terms of salaries and whatever other benefits, packages they give to the employees. And then he said the other problem with the mismanagement of these funds is that instead of having one nonprofit who's going in or just maybe a couple, they have multiple nonprofits, often duplicating services that other nonprofits are doing, or doing things that maybe one nonprofit could do. You've got one nonprofit that goes in and puts up the tents. You got another nonprofit that's going in and providing, service so that they can charge cell phones. It's not managed well. And so, so what ends up happening is a lot of this money that they're spending ends up going to other things that, $60,000 a year to maintain a tent. Most families don't have, they're maybe making $60,000 a year, like your average middle-class family. You might have a person earning $60,000. They might be making $120,000 a year, but still, for two people, you're talking per tent, $60,000 for a tent that you could probably go and buy at a store, for like maybe $60, you know what I mean? And so that's the thing, is like, okay, how are these funds really being used? And he was saying that of those funds, there's about estimated 17,000 homeless in the city of San Francisco, and yet these programs are probably will kind of, on a conservative saying, like, providing help to 3,000 out of the 17,000. So you still have 14,000 people that are not really fully getting the benefit of the services that the city is paying for.
Millions and millions of dollars is being spent, and just a fraction of people are being helped, and they're not even being helped. They're just sort of being propped up and catered to and made comfortable. But the problem is far away from being a solution. It seems like a money grab to me. These nonprofits are, doing a lot of fundraising. Yeah, I was in Portland and Seattle, and Seattle has this really novel thing that I had not really heard much about. They've got these tiny villages where they've got 50 or 60 small homes in random places throughout the city. I think there's probably, I counted 20 times 50, so it'd be 2,000 maybe total tiny villages that are like all over the place, where they actually transition people into these little places where they can live temporary, but they can leave when they want. And they're actually taking people off the streets in a big way. And there's like a dramatic difference in the number of people that are out there. I don't know if there just isn't any land on your side of the bridge to do this. There were some tiny villages in some random spots in Seattle, which sort of has a lot more room possibly. But Oakland's got a lot of room over there. I didn't see any of that. I hear people talking about it across the bridge, but I didn't see any little teeny encampment villages or anything like I saw up in the Northwest.
Oakland. Again, Oakland may have a land issue. I mean, because of the terrain, it just depends on, but Oakland's pretty dense in its population as well. I do know of one very, very small. There's a church in Castro Valley. So Castro Valley is probably about 13 miles southeast of Oakland. And there's a church there that's set up, it's not many, probably like a half dozen tiny homes on their property. And then they've been dealing with local authorities because they're in the county. They're actually unincorporated. They're trying to, acquire more land where they could build more tiny homes to help the homeless population. But that's an ongoing conversation of how to set up, these villages. And there's a whole lot that has to go into that conversation in terms of, where would land be available? How would they acquire that land? They still have to get feedback from the residents that live in the area to see if, how they feel about having maybe a small homeless encampment, set up next to their properties. There's a lot of different factors that go into it, but there's been a lot of conversation around it. There's probably more available in the East Bay or along the peninsula in some areas just south of San Francisco that may have the space to accommodate something like that. But yeah, those are processes I haven't delved too deeply into. I just know of that one local one I mentioned to you. I think Southern California is like that though.
Yeah. Well, hopefully I talk about it sometimes. It's something that's becoming a huge problem as the cost of living is going up. Home prices are going up. It's good for people that are already homeowners. It's tough for the young people, the old people. I think half of the homeless in Oakland are over 50, I heard. They're just aging into homelessness. I just, it's not in an area where I live, so I'm kind of out of touch with it. But when I go to the West Coast, it's just crazy how vast it is out there. And I don't know if there's a solution. I think it's just getting worse.
Well, I mean, even in Oakland and even where I live, again, I'm about 6 miles south of Oakland. When I talk to the sheriff, because down in the area where I live is unincorporated, so I deal primarily with the Alameda County Sheriff. And what they say is when they approach people with the services available in the county to help them with homeless issues, many of the people they encounter are not interested in taking advantage of it. So really the bigger issue that needs to be looked at is dealing with the addiction and the mental health issues, because you can take someone who has those issues and house them, but if they don't know how to manage or maintain that because they're dealing with mental health or addiction issues, again, you're not really, you're just kind of putting a Band-Aid on the problem. I think initially there need to be services to help people that are dealing with those addiction and mental health issues, so that then they have the ability to maintain a small shelter once, they have that shelter. So it's a matter of seeing, okay, how are we allocating the resources that we have to really address the major issue, which is really more heavily the addiction and the mental health issues. The video I sent you, he talks about how there are cartels, it's organized drug dealing happening in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. And literally there are guys on corners throughout the Tenderloin that are selling the drugs. And then there are people, some of the homeless people, what they'll do is they'll be the holders of the drugs for these guys. So they get if they get arrested, they don't get arrested with as much of the drug on them because they've got a homeless person holding the drugs for them. And then they pay those homeless people that are holding it for them with drugs. And so there's so many other issues that need to be addressed, to deal with a lot of the problem. I think a lot of people think it's just about a matter of housing and housing affordability, but it goes a lot deeper than that.
California, where drugs are free and legal, and you can't use straws, but all the graffiti and bum pee will wash into the ocean. But
yeah,
we can't have fish eating plastic straws.
No.
I no wonder so many people are leaving California. I grew up there. I left way before it got crazy. But God, man, I mean, we saw what happened in Virginia. I don't know. Maybe there's going to be another exodus of people or a change of politics. I don't know what's going to happen, or some people are just going to put up with it.
I know a lot of people who are planning to leave California. And they're going to a variety. I know I'm working with someone right now who's leaving California and moving back east. I know people who have plans within the next year or two to move like to Texas, Idaho, Utah, Nevada. A lot of people are looking to leave the state of California. And it's and including myself. And I've lived here my entire life. I've never lived outside of the Bay Area. And I'm even planning to leave California myself.
Well, that's a shame. They're losing a good, smart person, and the more I don't think there's a lot of good, smart people left in California. No, there are, but it's like you lose all your hardworking, smart people, and then you're left with all the people that are not gonna make the place good again. Like if you stayed, you could make a difference because you're clearly a motivated, smart person. But
yeah, I mean,
between now.
Yeah, and a lot of it just has to do on how the state's being governed. That's a big part. People look at California as a blue state, but it's really the main, metropolitan areas that tend to have more of that voting population. There are a lot of people who are more moderate and conservative in their views in the state. And unfortunately, our politicians don't want to acknowledge that or necessarily listen to what they're not really representing the people. In fact, one of the residents of Pacific Heights is clearly out of touch with what her constituents want. I will not name names, but I think you can probably put that together.
I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are out of touch with reality.
Yeah.
Do you get an impression that the city of San Francisco is trying to fix the homeless problem at all, or is it just beyond repair?
I think the elected officials have a couple of ideas for it, but I don't think a lot of it actually gets put into place. I mean, politics in every major city are a mess, and San Francisco especially so, between a DA who's the son of accomplices to murder, who's currently up for recall, the school board, etc. I think San Francisco has kind of constantly tried to sweep the problem under the rug, and I think it just keeps growing and growing, and at some point it's going to be too big to ignore. And for a lot of people, I think it already is too big to ignore. When you have tourists in town, it's definitely something they notice. It's definitely something that in those main areas is an issue. But at the same time, it's something you don't see if you're in one of the more affluent areas, and that's where the people who are making these decisions usually are. So, they're able to kind of blissfully ignore it. You look at like how the city, prided itself on addressing COVID and stomping out COVID. And yet at the same time, you have the number of overdoses and the homeless population in general. I mean, overdoses aren't just limited to the homeless population, but goes hand in hand. And, the city had far more overdose deaths than COVID deaths, and nobody seems to be, sharing those statistics, at least people from the government, because they can't really pat themselves on the back with it.
Do you think it's going to become, I mean, it's already out of control. How much worse can it get, you think, up there?
I think that it is going to get, if there's no rent control, it's going to get worse. It is, especially in California. And it's very sad. On your last video, someone had commented that, and I've heard this too, that other states bus their homeless population out to California, and I think that's even more sad because all it's going to do is just add to the population, and if there's no solution, then it's just going to grow into a bigger problem.
But like, I guess the question that I always have, and I can never get a direct answer, is like, so they clearly provide a support system. I know that I've read that the city gives, $500 per person for a homeless person to try to keep them on their feet. There's cases where the cities all over the Bay Area have given homeless people, needles, drugs, cigarettes, beer, at least in small amounts to kind of keep them stable. I guess it's better to have people like self-medicated than to allow them to kind of fly off the handle. Is that one reason so many people want to come to California, because of the benefits that they're given and the support system? They're like, hey, if I go to California, I'm going to get some cash and some stuff.
Honestly, I can't answer that question. I can't, because I don't have an answer to that. I don't know if people's perspective is to come to California and, get all these resources. Because from my experience, there is resources out there, but there should be more resources available. But when you have a wide population, of 50, plus 50K plus, then, it takes time, and it can be quite challenging.
So do you work for like a nonprofit? Are you like a social worker? I wasn't quite clear on like what your role was in the Bay Area.
So I do case management work with the homeless population and for one of the supporting agencies in the Bay Area. And it has been an amazing experience, and it's actually changed my perception, on this population. I can say that they're really good people. They have goals that they like to meet. And a lot of it is based on encouraging them to stay focused. And, let's work together and kind of create a solution for you. I have to say that I am just one person, and I wish that I could help the whole world, but unfortunately it's not like that. So it kind of sucks when, that you have helped, 1 to 20, 30, so on and so forth people, but there's still thousands and thousands of others that need certain help. A lot of it, a lot of them need medical attention. Just like I really admire how you went to the encampment in Oakland, because, they talked about some specific facts, like, they do need medical attention. A lot of them, they don't go to the doctor, or they feel discouraged about going to the doctor, because I know from my experience, there's individuals, they'll go to the hospital, and just because they're homeless, the hospital kicks them right out. They don't want to be bothered with them. They feel like they're just going to loiter in the lobby or find a way to stay. But really, it's like, no, they need, they got the flu, or they got.
So who pays? So like I'm a homeless person. I don't have any medical. I have a tooth that needs to be taken out. I go to can they just walk in and get, who pays for their care? And if they don't have insurance, why would they take them in? Is there like a policy in place or something?
So I think what will happen, I think for the most part, a lot of them have Medi-Cal. There's a lot of agencies out there that, try to ensure that they at least have, the state insurance to be able to like cover specific things or whatsoever. And especially if they're receiving disability, they would automatically be enrolled to their own kind of health insurance plans. But it's just, I think that most of society has a negative light on this population that, just like I said, from my experience, participants will go to the hospital and they would just have another negative experience. And a lot of it has to do with their, economics too.
The decision, there's smart people that are running the state. You would have thought they would have figured out a way to solve this problem, or at least tweak the way they're doing things, because it's clearly not working very well. I mean, you have I think California has 170,000 homeless people, and you can't force people to lower their rent. All you can do is provide help for the people that have been kicked out. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. There's somewhere between 10 and 15,000 homeless people in San Francisco, and that's only a fraction of the estimated 170,000 homeless people living in California as a whole. Hey guys, so if anything I just talked about upset you or made you sad or mad, well then do something about it. Call your local leaders and demand change. Chip in and help those in need. Make your community better, because communities don't get better without hard work and determination. America's a great place. It just needs some more love and pride.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.
And are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation.